So we're in an extraordinary setting. This is going out not at the time we record, because for informational security purposes, we can't publish this while the event is on. But we're talking to you from Brave One, which is a fantastic military technical event in Ukraine showcasing the latest developments in drones, electronic warfare. You probably can't see it here, but we've got a sort of submarine torpedo thing there. We've got all sorts of remote vehicles, and it's an incredible show of innovation. But for those of you who really appreciated the interview with Sean Pinner, we've got another, I won't say treat, because what we're going to talk about is fairly, harsh and unpleasant stuff. But could you introduce yourself? We're going to dive into your story, which I think is a unique one.
I agree. I'm Alex Drueke. I am from the United States. I was born in Alabama. I'm a U.S. Army veteran. I did 12 years in the Army Reserves, and I did 2 tours in Iraq. And so when the invasion happened, I really felt that I had things to offer to Ukraine. I was a platoon sergeant. I love training soldiers. I wanted to come over and help in any way I could. So I showed up just a few weeks after the full-scale invasion.
And your motivations, because some people come out because they have prior connections or they have a partner. Others have been to Ukraine. Others have a motivation for democracy. They really feel that this is this is the cutting edge, the bleeding edge of the fight against tyranny and autocracy. Some people just come out because, well, maybe they come from small towns and there's not much to do, and this is their moment to live a different life. What's your motivation?
And I will add that some people come for very wrong reasons. But usually we get rid of them
because they're
fast.
Broken themselves. They have issues.
They're broken themselves, or they want to come over and take a couple pot shots at Russians and then go home and be war heroes. Or there's a term called sex tourist as well. There was a fair amount of that in 22. I mean, it's really changed since then. They went home. But my motivation, I had no prior connections to Ukraine. I'm not Ukrainian. I didn't speak Ukrainian. I am a lover of history, a student of history, and so I was familiar with the history of Ukraine, but not necessarily the culture. But the word that I like to use is I felt compelled to come over. It was not my decision in a way. It was something that I had to do because I really saw this as a clear case of right versus wrong, of good versus evil, of black versus white. There was no question about who was on the side of good in this war. And being a GWOT veteran, a lot of us can't say the same thing about our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. To some degree myself and a lot of the guys that I met, in a way it was atoning for those wars. So I mean that certainly played a part, but yeah, it was just, I knew this was the right thing to do, and my fellow American POW, Andy, I'm going to use a quote from him, but because I really like it. He said, I don't like bullies, and looking back later on in life, I didn't want to be the guy who didn't stand up against the bully in some way, and so yeah, I think that was a part of it too. I knew that this was the time to act, and later on in life, if I didn't act in some way, I would regret it.
Yeah, and there's a certain I know the British or the Anglo-Saxon culture of supporting an underdog. We have a certain we don't like the bully, and the underdog is something we can empathize with,
right.
But also we don't want to necessarily associate with lost causes, and I think that's part of the problem, isn't it? For those who are pro-Ukraine, we certainly don't see it as a lost cause. In fact, we see victory as inevitable at some point. But for those who don't support Ukraine, it's quite easy to fall into that narrative that there's no way that Ukraine can win. Russia's, never been defeated, etc. But as a student of history, you'll know that's
right.
not the
not
case.
True at all. Yeah. I think we have a very similar thing in most of America. We love an underdog story. So many of our movies are about that. And standing up to the bully, and I think the U.S. Army really indoctrinated in me, well, not indoctrinated, but instilled in me a sense of selfless service, and coming over and serving the underdog however I could was very, very important to me. How did you end that?
Yeah. Oh, and I mean that influences, unfortunately, a whole load of things, doesn't it? From political decisions to why would you tip armaments and costs and put certain parts of your economy at risk for a lost cause?
Right.
That's a real problem.
It is a real problem, and I think for those in America that are disinterested in the war, or war fatigue is a real thing. I saw that in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I think a lot of the world, and especially in America because of the isolation, it's just war fatigue, and they're tired of hearing about it. They do believe it's a lost cause, or even if it's not, why are we getting involved? We have problems
It's a long way away. I can't find it on a map.
That's right, and the cost of eggs has gone up. That's what I care about right now. It's an unfortunate luxury that we have.
That's okay, because we can buy them from Russia.
Exactly, exactly, yeah.
Now, your story is unique, but before we go into that, let's just quickly talk about where we are, because we once this is published, it's okay. What amazes me is the profusion of innovation. It really feels like there's some, not just buzz here, but there's a Silicon Valley vibe. There's people networking, experimenting, sharing ideas, pushing the boundaries of what's possible. What's your impression?
It's very similar. I mean, I am amazed at how the Ukrainians have been able to innovate and become creative and problem solve and overcome problems in just months, whereas it would take the U.S. government years of government contracts to even start thinking about correcting it. I mean, we are decades behind Ukraine in terms of technology and how modern wars are going to be fought for at least the next decade. I know the U.S. is starting to try and reconcile that, but I mean, Ukraine, they're doing it out of necessity. The battlefield and the drone technology and the UGV technology, I mean, everything is changing in months. And so the level of, how they're able to target specific issues and rapidly deploy tech, and I mean, it's astounding. It really is. And there's so many impressive things.
Reminds of the Second World War, its survival, or in terms of the German side, the idea of victory is a real accelerant to innovation.
It is. It definitely is.
And your direct experience, now I don't know how long we will talk about your captivity in a minute, but I don't know how long you were actually serving, so whether you're able to see those innovations taking place, whether you're able to see the adaptations in terms of training and integration, and whether you saw, I know this is a three-part question, I apologize, Ria,
it's okay.
And whether you saw also maybe some adaptations in leadership, because I know from conversations with people, having remnants of Soviet thinking, very hierarchical thinking, which is not helpful for innovation, whether you saw traces of that as well.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of the evolution of things, like I said, I came over, I think it was exactly 6 weeks after the invasion happened, and I immediately joined the Legion. And there, I started out as light infantry. Drones were not a thing at all for foreign fighter light infantry. But we did see, there was an amazing response from the West. Every country you can imagine, I saw volunteers from, and everyone came here to help. But every Ukrainian unit every foreign unit has to have a Ukrainian leader. And so, at the battalion level, the brigade level, and up, we did see a very large amount of Soviet doctrine holdovers. Even Starsky, he went to a war college in Russia. So it's ingrained in the older people and the higher command. What we really tried to do as at least Americans was begin teaching the Ukrainians that you need an NCO corps. It's one thing Russia doesn't have. It's one thing Ukraine is trying to work on, where you don't have to wait for the colonel to make a decision. You can make a decision on the ground. And that makes a very, very big difference. But in terms of the drone technology, as I said, when I joined the Legion, they were nowhere. In the summer of 22, I ended up joining a GORD unit, Special Forces, and there we were a reconnaissance unit. There's only 10 of us, and we just went out for recon missions, and all we used a drone for, we had a Medevac, and we just sent it up, saw where the artillery was, put it down, and then told the Ukrainians, bomb this location. That was what drones were being used for. Then obviously I was captured, and it was so amazing when I was lucky enough to be released, and I started talking to the guys back here, the ones who were still in Ukraine. they started telling me like what they've been doing with drones while I was gone, and improvised bombs and rigging their own dropping systems, and just again this crazy ingenuity and innovation. And then that's when I really realized that drones are the future. Drones will be the main part of the battlefield for a very long time.
Before we move on to the next question, I'd like to make a personal recommendation that I know you will appreciate. You may have seen my interview last week with the producer of the film series Kyiv of Mine, Ronnie Apteker. Well, I've partnered with them to help raise awareness of what I believe is an important series of films made for a Western audience to help break through absurd stereotypes about Ukraine, some of which, of course, are amplified by Russian propaganda. You can watch these films for free now. Details in a second. Kyiv of Mine is a documentary series about Ukraine's extraordinary capital, which I had the privilege to visit for the first time in January this year. The film production began in 2018, and of course much has changed since then. It's now 2025, and the story is far from over. Kyiv of Mine is a fast-paced, beautifully filmed, humorous, fun, insightful, heartbreaking, moving, and hopeful work. The very antithesis, in fact, of a doom-laden and worthy wartime documentary. This is a work that is extraordinarily uplifting. My friend Operator Starsky says the film is made with so much love. The film series will make you laugh and cry. It's the only film about Ukraine that began before the war yet has traced lives through the tumultuous times, and which follows the lives of more than a dozen Ukrainians in real time. This is an historic period told through highly personal and emotive stories from Kiev's days of emerging prosperity after the Maidan Revolution through COVID and the full-scale invasion. This film is a breath of fresh air. Ukraine deserves a better conversation in the world, one that isn't centered around war, says Julian Ellis, filmmaker on Kyiv of Mine. It's hard not to argue with that, and the filmmakers have fully delivered on this promise. This is essential watching for anyone who calls themselves pro-Ukrainian, but I think it's also vital to get friends, colleagues, and family to watch it too, because the reality is few people have a vivid impression of Ukraine or any direct connection with its people. War is inhumane and abstract. Building an alternative perception is essential for engaging the world with the importance of Ukraine's struggle. And they've created a certain transparency, haven't they? And some of the people I'm speaking to say that actually it's created some real problems which don't yet have solutions. We're seeing some emergent solutions here, but one of those is the idea of Medevac. And this isn't like, let's say, Vietnam, where you could get people out relatively quickly, right. You can improve the chances of survival. You've got the horrific situation here where you can't really get vehicles within a couple of miles of the zero, and people are being lost simply because they can't get them out of those critical right. situations.
It's incredibly unfortunate. You mentioned Vietnam, but even in Iraq and Afghanistan, if you were injured, you could count on a helicopter coming in pretty quick if you needed it, or at least being able to get a wheeled vehicle up there to pull you out. We had the advantage of strength, and it's such a complicated issue to see here. It's a mix of World War I trench warfare with robot technology we didn't think was possible for another 20 years. And so, yeah, it has created this massive, dangerous no man's land at the zero line. And here there are, it's the first time I've actually been able to see the UGVs that they are planning and have been slowly implementing for casualty evacuation on the battlefield. And Ukraine has finally had some successful evacuations with it, and it is saving lives. So I'm really glad to see that there's a strong presence for that here, and I like to see it being developed.
So you obviously had some impressions of your adversary when you're fighting them, but unfortunately you were captured, and you got to observe Russians at close quarter. I know this is probably painful to recount this over and over, but could you describe your experiences and how you were captured, but then what your subsequent experiences were?
I mean, of course, I'm very happy to talk about it. It can be difficult, but I really think that the world needs to know firsthand how systemically cruel and brutal the Russian culture and society is right now. And if you don't believe that they are, then come talk to me, please. We can have a long discussion. I can't get too much into the details of our capture because of operational security, but myself and another American in the GUR unit, we were captured on an operation north of Kharkiv, less than 6 kilometers from the Russian border. Initially, they kept us in a little outpost, and there the treatment was not terrible. I mean, we several times we were put down on our knees, blindfolded, guns put to our head. You know, we really thought we were going to be assassinated on this dirt road. But other than that, it was, for the lower enlisted, the privates, it was kind of soldiers treating soldiers like soldiers. It wasn't all that bad in that respect. But then they took us into Russia for a week to what seemed to be a temporary POW camp. There they really started the intense interrogation. We had gone out completely stripped, no phones, no passports, no paperwork, no nothing, because we didn't want to get caught with it. But then because we got captured, we were having to prove who we were, while at the same time telling them, no, I assure you, I am not CIA. The U.S. government is not directly involved. That's what they really wanted. There it was a fair amount of war crimes and human rights abuses. I mean, it was purposeful dehydration, it was sleep deprivation, several beatings. 3 in the morning, they pulled me out of the tent. A guy beat me for an indeterminate amount of time, and I ended up with 4 broken ribs.
But without proper medical attention.
Without any medical attention, yeah. Right. And that wasn't even an interrogation. He just beat me. No questions. No. Yeah.
Entertainment on his part.
Yeah. Well, and to beat me into submission, hopefully, to where I'd be more compliant.
And did you have a sense that they wanted to perhaps or could use you as a sort of propaganda thing, so they might want you to admit something that's not true, that they could then weaponize as a narrative?
Definitely. When we get later in the story, it gets more intense in that regard, but there was some of that in Russia. A lot of recorded statements where they were telling me what to say. And if I said the wrong thing, they'd say, we will do it again, until I got it right. Now, throughout this whole experience, I tried to avoid as much of that as possibly could, talk around issues, talk so much about something tiny, they forget about the big thing. I really did what I could, but I could tell that, yes, they were very happy to have captured 2 Americans because they knew we were valuable.
Yeah, in many different senses there. And how long did that persist? What was and what were the different movements? Did you get a sense of where you were and
Yes, for that point we did. When we first got captured, they eventually they loaded us up on a military truck, and just happened to leave the back flap open, so I could. It was the afternoon, and I could keep an eye on the sun and realize we were heading generally north and east, and then eventually, I guess maybe 45 minutes into it, we crossed what was obviously a border. It was guarded. And then I look in the distance and I saw an completely empty building that said duty free. And I said, oh, we've just crossed an international border. And so then we got out of the truck, and a very large man came up, punched me as hard as he could in the stomach, and said, welcome to Russia. So I was fairly sure that we were in Russia at that point. Like I said, we stayed there for a week, and then they moved us to what we call a black site in the Donetsk People's Republic, so-called Donetsk People's Republic. And we call it a black site because, I mean, everybody's familiar with like the CIA black site stories.
But these places are terrifying, actually.
It is. Yeah, I would not recommend it. And I honestly think that they moved us there so that they could say to the U.S., we don't have your guys. The DPR does. Mm-hmm. If you want them back, you have to negotiate with the DPR, which means you got to recognize
plausible
them as a
deniability.
state. That's right. I mean, it was obvious that the Russians were still in charge. It was obvious that FSB and MGB were controlling the whole situation, but it was DPR guards the majority of the day, which was kind of clever. We were there for roughly a month, and that's where it got really intense. I was eating a diet of just a small loaf of bread every day. The water had unidentifiable stuff floating in it. It was every day, all day, just constant beatings, just beatings, and really intense interrogation. This is when they started to try and actually beat the lie into us that we were CIA. They electrocuted me with what appeared to be a car battery 4 times because they swore that part of my story, which was actually the truth, was a fabricated lie to protect my CIA contacts who had helped me get into Ukraine. And so, yeah, it was like they wanted it so bad to be true. They were willing to do anything to get there. And then they eventually they worked out a system of forced phone calls back to the United States to try and make contact with the U.S. government. We finally did reach the State Department, and then it became, I quickly found out that they wanted to get rid of us, but they didn't know how, and they didn't know what they wanted in return. And so they were trying to go through me to determine that from the State Department, and the State Department saying, I can't tell you, and I'm avoiding as much of what I can say, and we're teaching them civic lessons about how the United States government works, because they just thought that my mother could call President Biden and say, get him out on his personal cell phone, right? Yeah, sure. They honestly believed it, and so that was weird. But then they finally figured out that wasn't going to work for them, and I don't know if that was the impetus or it was another reason. They ended up moving us to sort of an isolation prison, still somewhere in the DPR. That's where I was lucky enough to meet Sean Penner. We could shout over the walls to each other during our one hour of outside time in a tiny cell.
And he also, physical maltreatment. I think he was stabbed in the leg and various other.
Yes, I mean, yeah, because he'd been captured much earlier, the fall of Mariupol, and we think that all of us had black site stories, but we think it may have been different black sites with different treatment and different interrogators, and so yeah, we loved exchanging stories about what they had done. Yeah.
Did you get the impression that that's systemic, or that that actually this is down to the individual whims and caprices of the people in the individual sites?
Both. I said before, it is a systemic disease. It's ingrained in the Russian children, starting at grade school. So it is something that I think is present in all of them. It's just to varying degrees. Some were incredibly cruel. They knew where my broken ribs were, and so they target those specifically just to keep them broken and make it hurt more. But then there was one that he gave me a pet name, Sashko. It's a loving nickname for Alexander. And he would rapid fire try to teach me Russian words, and then he would beat me. But, it was, I don't know. And, yeah.
There is a phrase in Russian, "не бить, не любить," or something like that, which is like, if you don't beat them, you don't love them, or something like that. So he's showing you about two sides of that.
That's right.
Beating with care.
That's right. It's a nice beatings. Yeah.
It's extraordinary. I think the phrase there is, if you don't beat them, they won't love you. I think that's more of the interpretation.
Yeah.
It's
strict
a domestic scenario there. But humiliation, it seems to me, from my more academic kind of thing, humiliation plays a significant role in exerting control and reinforcing hierarchy. Did you get that sense that it's not just a physical thing, but actually this process of humiliation is a key part of the experience?
Yeah, I mean, there were a few instances that were obvious humiliation. Make us strip down to just our boxers, and they didn't want to go below that because they're incredibly homophobic. But if they weren't, they would have made me take off my underwear as well. Out in the open. I mean, there were humiliation like that. I don't know if that was a primary motivator, though.
Yeah.
I think it was just more the beatings to break our will, so we would say whatever they wanted us to say.
And now you're back here in Ukraine. You spend some time coming back here. What is your overall sense? And if people watching this are not sure why Europe and the US should really get behind a Ukrainian victory and explicitly a Russian defeat, because until we want Russian defeat, there's no sense of victory and justice, I think. What would you say to say, look, okay, we need to go beyond what we're doing at the moment, which is not aligning ourselves with victory. It's letting Ukraine bleed to survive, but no more than that.
That's right.
How would you try to persuade?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to that. To give you a little background, when we got released in late September, and I went home and I took an appropriate amount of time to physically and mentally heal, and then I said, you know, I can use this terrible, horrible, miserable experience for good if I do it the right way. And I'm lucky enough to be retired from the U.S. Army, and so I have dedicated my retirement to advocating for Ukraine as much as I can and in as many ways as I can. So in the summer of 23, I came back over for 6 weeks for humanitarian work. In 24, I came back for 4.5 months to work with the National Guard on training and fundraising, and now I'm back here with Defense Tech Ukraine to work on helping the innovators and the designers and the engineers who have all the knowledge and the expertise here in Ukraine connect with the financiers that they desperately need. If they can get the money, they'll make these products that will win the war and benefit the West. And that's the thing. Of course, throughout the war, there's been ups and downs of the mood and the attitude of the Ukrainian people. But from the very first moment I landed to right as we're speaking today, I've always been impressed by their resolve and their strength and their determination. And on top of that, on a more human element, it's also their humor and their generosity. And even when they're struggling through war, they are just incredibly generous, nice people. And so, I mean, I've really fallen in love with Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. And I firmly believe, I believe this the entire war. If we give them the tools they need at the time, they will win this war. We could have won it in late 22, early 23, if it hadn't been a slow trickle. And we have to stop that just stemming the bleeding. We're giving them enough to not lose, but not enough to win. And we need to give them enough to win. And I assure you, if Russia is victorious in any way, even if it's slight land concessions on the part of Ukraine, if Russia does win, they will be emboldened and they will start going for Europe. I mean, there's so many threats, and there's the drones in Poland, that's obvious aggression. They're testing us. They're letting us know you're next. They're not worried about it. And it's going to embolden other dictatorships around the world to seek out their goals, China going for Taiwan and such. It's really going to change the global world order if we don't ensure the right thing happens here in Ukraine.
And because people say, well, what's in it for us? I mean, I guess first of all, Europe becoming significantly poorer is going to directly impact the US. Mm-hmm. But if Ukraine is secured, there's extraordinary riches, because this is going to be quite a booming place if it's fully integrated into Europe. Not just civic space, defense space as well.
Right. I think it's economic space. I mean, there's resources here. There's going to be a massive rebuilding project that right now is estimated to cost over $600 billion. So it's an investment opportunity in so many ways. And then, yes, the technology that's going to come out into Europe and into the U.S. To prepare us for future wars, wherever that might be. That is absolutely invaluable. The experience they have, it's not just the drone technology, it's not just the AI things they're working on, it's the battlefield experience of how to properly use these tools. That is something that the West desperately needs.
And the last area here is something we're talking about just before we hit record. That is that one of the propaganda narratives that really cuts through, especially amongst the evangelicals, is that Christians are persecuted here, and Russia is this extraordinary bastion of traditional values.
Right. Yeah. I assure you that's not the case.
You've experienced the traditional values, but they're not the ones they really want you to focus on, which is the violence and the...
Right. I am quite familiar with my Bible, and I can tell you that the teachings that I have read in there, what happens in Russia is the exact opposite. And I mean, it's very apparent that the Russian Orthodox Church is just an arm of the Kremlin, 100%. And so, yes, the narrative is that, in particular President Zelensky, but just Ukraine in general, is persecuting Russian Orthodox priests. But it's that they're saying you are a Russian agent, you need to leave the country. Whereas Russia is actually coming into Ukraine and murdering, assassinating evangelical priests. It's in the grand scheme of things, it's a relatively small number, but in terms of percentage, it is massive. So the evangelicals, the Christians in Europe and the U.S. need to realize that the real enemy of Christianity, the real enemy of your values is Russia. And right now, Ukraine is standing up for every value that we purport to believe in: freedom, democracy, the sovereignty, the right for self-determination, being a good person. There's all these things that we stand for.
Sanctity of life.
Sanctity of life.
There's none of that in Russia.
There's none of that in Russia. No. It's and that's why they treated us so poorly. And because they do worse to their own people.
I think your experience is invaluable. This has been a thrilling conversation, and it's incredible to be here, hearing your story, seeing the defence in action. I know on behalf of the audience, they're going to be immensely grateful to your service, what you're doing now, and to this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I really appreciate the opportunity to hopefully inform the public of the realities of this war.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Thank you.
A final word from our partners, the makers of Kyiv of Mine. All 3 films are now available to watch for free on YouTube. Please check out the links to the dedicated website, which tells you more about the film, its subjects, and the filmmakers. Also in the description is a link to the YouTube channel where you can watch the films now. Do let us know in the comments what you think of them and if they inspire you as much as they have inspired me.